Today on In the House, we have a very special guest with us. We have Nicole Blair. Nicole is an architect and general contractor working in Austin, Texas. Her practice focuses mainly on residential, small commercial, and public art building projects. Her projects have received design awards at the local, state, and international levels, and her work has been published by Architectural Record, Dwell, and Texas Architect. We got Nicole on today because of her amazing design talent and her ability to think critically and think outside of the box, literally. One of her projects featured on this year's AIA tour was the Perch, which I got to go tour, and it's amazing. So I'll post plenty of pictures so people can follow along. Nicole's ability to work within these tight boundaries and very tight constraints and think critically and solve the problem of how to add an addition to this bungalow and not interrupt the surrounding area and not destroy the backyard, and all while the clients are still living there, is an amazing feat. And so we got her on because we wanted to really dive deep into that project and figure out what some of the challenges were and how they went about solving it. We also talked about an earlier project called the Hive, where it was a similar situation, very tight constraints, and very small footprint that she had to work with. So again, we dive into the construction process and the design and the thought process behind why the building looks the way it does. Another project that we talk about is the Lincoln Chapel. That one stuck out particular to me because of the form and just the beauty in its simplicity. It really looks like an origami shape or an origami crane, if you will, but it's all poured monolithically out of concrete. So it really gives you an appreciation for how it was constructed and the design and really the thought that went into the smallest little detail in that project. We hope you like this episode. If you do, please share with a friend and give us a 5-star rating. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much
Thanks
for having
joining
me.
us. Well, I'm really interested to hear about your story and your background and how you came to. Were you born and raised here in Texas? Are you native Texan, or did you move here? Tell us your story.
Where should I begin? I was
Anywhere. You start.
Okay.
We've got enough time. You
Okay.
take your time and tell us your story.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in Austin, and I guess my interest in architecture started in junior high, believe it or not.
Okay.
I went to, at the junior high that I was attending, they had a career fair in the gymnasium, which I guess a lot of us remember and experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there was an architecture table with a big, crisp, white, clean, beautiful model and 4 or 5 architects standing behind the table talking about what a great profession it was for women, talking about that it was a great profession for people that loved art and also were good at math. So that kind of resonated with me, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it just clicked when I saw that. I thought that's what I want to do.
Were you always kind of into art? Was that your thing, or?
I think I liked things that were artistic early on. Like, I appreciated things that had kind of an artistic quality, but
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't painting or drawing like on a regular basis, anything like that. It was really that model, that when in seeing that model, that I thought, this is something I'm interested in learning more about.
Yeah.
And then what ended up happening was when I got to high school, back then there weren't as many options for electives, but I took some things like drafting and some art classes and photography.
Yeah.
And took more math classes. And then I started looking into universities that had architecture programs like UT. And I discovered that a lot of the architecture programs that, or universities that had good architecture programs also had summer architecture programs for high school students.
Oh, cool.
So after my sophomore year of high school, I did a 6-week architecture program at UT during the summer, which was like an overnight. Have you guys heard about these programs? Like I think it was called the Summer Discovery Program.
Okay,
Great opportunity.
Yeah. Did either of you do anything like that?
Haven't. I've heard of them though.
Okay. So after my sophomore year, I did a 6-week program at UT, and it was taught by an architect named Derek Barsinski. I think he might still even be practicing in Austin. Had a house on the home store maybe 10 years ago. And I just fell in love with the problem solving, like the design aspect, just the idea of having this problem that you then get to kind of creatively solve, and learning about architects and how they solved different problems through construction, through building. And I was just kind of hooked.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a big 3D puzzle. Yeah, it's really cool. I think that's kind of what hooked me as well. I mean, I'm obviously more on the construction side, but being able to take a problem and figure out a creative solution to work around it. But
yeah, exactly.
Go
ahead.
That's a cool program. No, I've definitely, like Adrian, I didn't do a program like that myself, but I have heard of those that are out there. So that's really cool. That they kind of open it up to high schoolers. And is it go younger? Like, is it just open to high schoolers, or?
So I don't know what they're doing now. I mean, that was quite a while ago, right? I mean, that was probably 30 years ago that I did that program. I think at the time they were expecting it to be high school juniors and seniors. But since I already had an interest, I asked to do it after my sophomore year, and they let me into the program. Obviously, that's just 1 year difference. Yeah. But then the next year, because I loved that one so much, the next year I did one in the summer at the Rhode Island School of Design.
Wow.
Which they also had, they had a summer program. So, and then I fell in love with it even more. And then when I was at the Rhode Island School of Design, everyone was talking about Cornell and how great Cornell University was for an architecture school. Yeah. So it kind of put that in my head that was where people that were really serious about architecture would be going to school. So in high school, I applied to a bunch of programs, but when I got into Cornell, I just knew that's where I wanted to go. But maybe you already know this from reading some of my bio. I got there, and it wasn't what I was expecting. So, So I think I had such a great experience at UT and at the Rhode Island School of Design. I just was expecting it to be that great or better. And when I got to the university, they were going through a lot of changes. The dean had recently stepped down. A lot of the faculty that was pretty well known had been stepping back. And the school seemed really disorganized. And I didn't really like the classes that I was in my first semester. It didn't have the same structure or rigor that I had at UT and at RISD. So I pretty quickly decided it wasn't the right architecture school for me, but I fell in love with the university. It was a beautiful campus. I was already meeting so many amazing people, very different to be in upstate New York than in Texas. And I had never seen snow. Like, the snow was like falling like it did, and I felt like I was in like a Peanuts cartoon with like these like big
fluffy
huge
chunks,
flakes of snow falling. I mean, it was absolutely gorgeous.
Are you close to the Great Lakes up there?
Oh yeah, very close.
Because you get that lake effect snow, right? Like, that's some serious snowfall, right? I mean, the very first time it snowed, I felt like I was in like a cartoon. It was absolutely stunning. Yeah. And it just I think a foot of snow fell, and it was before. It was before Halloween, it was huge amounts of snowfall. Right. And I was like, where am I? It's it felt like a dream. So I really kind of fell in love with the university, and I thought it was sort of strange to be a freshman at that point. I felt like I had this focus for so long of I want to be an architect. I really want to be an architect. I'm finally at this place where I can study architecture. And I didn't like the architecture program. And so I thought maybe it would be good
to know something else besides architecture. So at Cornell, they'll put you, like when you know you want to leave your major, they don't automatically let you stay at the university. They put you kind of like in no man's land for a semester. They let you take classes anywhere throughout the university that you want to take them. But then you have to apply to that new department, and you either get accepted or rejected. So you have like one semester.
That's cool that they do that, though. That's pretty cool. Like
Yeah.
If you're unsure about what you want to do, you know, you're not tied down to one thing, and they kind of give you that break to be able to figure it out.
Yeah, and is UT the same way? Like, you get accepted to a particular program. You can't just all of a sudden, like, get accepted into the architecture school and then, like, transfer to radio, television, and film, right? You probably have to...
That I don't know.
Then apply.
I went to Baylor and
Okay.
I started pre-med and realized that I wasn't gonna do that, and I switched straight over to business school.
And that wasn't...
They
hard to
were
do.
fine with it, but it was
Okay.
also a while ago. I think it was about the same time that you were at school, and things were a lot easier back then.
Right.
Yeah. No, for me, I mean, I kind of had a weird journey. I mean, I actually went to the Air Force Academy, and I wanted to get into mechanical engineering, and I didn't quite have the grades for it, and so I kind of felt stuck there. I wasn't able to declare the major that I wanted, and so I just felt like the best choice at that time was just to leave, and so I went back home for a while, and then I wound up at A&M, and I actually did want to go into architecture. That was kind of my next plan. Was I'd always been interested in design and architecture, but just the feeling, or at least in my mind, the image that I had was an architect just, you know, was inside all day, you know, drawing plans and whatnot. I was like, that didn't really appeal to me. I wanted to be outside in the field, and I declared construction science, and that's under the School of Architecture at A&M, and that seemed more up my alley, and I had no idea what it was. It was like, construction science, cool. I'll just do that. And so the rest is history. So you eventually graduate Cornell, right? And
Yeah, so I ended up in a major called Textile and Apparel Management. That was my official major.
I was
Did
curious.
you already know about this?
I was
Okay.
curious about that. I was
Okay.
like, so tell me about that.
So I picked that major because at Cornell, I could do a full business sequence. So it was kind of like getting a business undergrad degree. It was tied to... At Cornell, they call it the Agricultural Economics Department, but that's basically like the undergraduate business department when I was there. So I took it. So Textile and Apparel Management took that business sequence. It was also loosely tied with the interior design department at Cornell.
Okay.
It was in a college that was originally home economics, right? So like textiles and interior design, and it was like a whole bunch of different majors that had originally started out as a college for women that women were accepted to. So they were already loosely side by side with each other in this college, so I could take a lot of classes in both of those departments and still fulfill requirements.
Okay.
But it was also a loose enough major, which was not common at Cornell, that I could also study abroad for a semester and still graduate in 4 years, even though I had started on the architecture school for a semester. And I studied abroad with Syracuse University with their architecture students.
Oh, cool.
And we studied in Florence. And I took architecture classes with their architecture students. And I took art history classes. And I took, I did a batik class. And I took a cooking class. And it was just amazing. Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
It was incredible.
Super cool.
And I think, yeah. And even though during that whole time, there was, in the back of my head, I was like, you want to be an architect. Like, what are you doing in textiles and apparel? I think now in retrospect, I can see how a lot of that training and those courses that I took and the travel and other people that I met, how it all like ends up relating to the buildings that I designed today.
Yeah.
And I think making them richer than if I had just only stayed in architecture.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely makes more well-rounded. But I mean, especially yourself, you're handling the entire scope of the project. right? I mean, you're designing not only, you know, the exterior and all the exterior elevations, you're looking at the interior too, and then you're building, right? I mean, you're really handling the entire thing from start to finish.
Well, I think it depends on the project. So I don't general contract all of my projects.
Okay.
I probably general contract a quarter of them. So it's really only a handful of them that I get to general contract. And I've general contracted a few projects for other people where I wasn't the only architect involved. So I've done that as well. But I've discovered that when I have the opportunity to be the architect and the general contractor, that the end product comes out better. And I get... I usually have a better relationship with the client.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because it's more involved and direct. And I realized that, you know, kind of coming back to that problem solving, I get, like, during construction, ideas will come up or things will come up, even thinking about these projects for months, if not years. And, you know, if you're intimately involved with it day to day while it's being constructed, and you already know what the design intent is and exactly what the client wants. Mm-hmm. You know, I found that I can take advantage of some opportunities that come up during construction that are a lot harder to do on the projects where I'm not general contracting them.
Yeah. Well, and the depth of knowledge that gives you on the next project and moving forward.
Yes.
For you to be an architect and a builder, the cross-pollination of information there, because then on your next project, you're taking constructability knowledge into that next design. I think it's incredible.
Yeah.
I do too.
It's really fun. And I'm definitely not working alone because, as you all know from the construction industry, it's like I'm learning from subcontractors. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm finding out what they're good at. I'm finding out what they like to do, what they really want to be doing. And then I can incorporate some of those things on the next project or within the project itself. Yeah. And structural engineers, and there's other consultants at different, and, you know, when I'm picking lighting, I'm like talking to a lighting designer sometimes. And if I can work with some of the same subs on project after project, mm-hmm. then that creates even more efficiencies and more opportunities for the project to be better.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of efficiency, I mean, you definitely, since you're wearing all of the hats, I mean, you don't have to, make a selection and then wait on an approval and all that. Like, you're doing all that yourself. So, I mean, there's just immediate feedback, and you can just proceed, you know, definitely super efficient.
Yeah, it gives me a lot. It really helps with budgets, really, because like when I see an opportunity that's going to cost more, I know immediately what things we can cut back on that we haven't ordered yet, that aren't necessarily as crucial to the end product. And a lot of times, you know, everyone is on a budget to some mm-hmm. degree, and mm-hmm. it's important to be able to have that kind of flexibility where you can say, I'd love to spend $5,000 more on this than we thought, but here's 5 ideas for how we could save $5,000. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think clients appreciate that. And it goes along, you know, it's helpful, in just being able to have that kind of control.
Why did you choose that model of being more design build versus just that traditional, you know, architect and then, you know, bringing in a builder, you know, that whole model? Why did you?
I think what Lonnie's asking in a nutshell is, why would you want to take on the headache of building the project?
Yes, correct.
Well, I love being able to do that. It doesn't feel like a headache to me. I mean, what feels like a headache to me is when I have a project and there's a contractor and I don't get the phone call, like when there's a problem that has to be solved. Mm-hmm. Like that's when I start having sleepless nights, and which does happen. I have a project under construction right now in LA, and I'm far away from that project. I know I'm not as involved in the day-to-day in decision making as I want to be, and as I could be if it was a project that was closer to home. So, And part of what ended up, the reason I got into it initially is because I had projects that I thought aesthetically were really interesting and kind of compelling from a design standpoint. And when they got bid out, they were too expensive. And so they'd get shelved. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking, like, I think if I can talk to the subcontractors myself and explain why it's different, but also why it's similar, those prices won't feel like unknowns. Mm-hmm. Like, I think what I felt like was happening was there was maybe a miscommunication between the contractor that was bidding it and the subcontractors they were working with, and them thinking it was a whole lot more complicated than it really was. And so I wanted to have that conversation more directly with them. Yeah. But also to answer your question, like, I don't see myself as a design build firm at all. That actually is not how I operate. I only agree to do design for a client. Mm-hmm. And then only after we have a complete design, like a bid set construction, like basically bid close to construction set, do I even consider possibly the option of contracting it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I never agree up front to be the designer and the builder of a project.
Right.
Because I really I'm only one person. I can only take on small projects. I can only take on projects that are pretty close to my house, like within a couple of miles. Sure. I can't take on projects that are, there's a whole lot of, there's a certain type of client I feel like is the right client for me. It has to be a client that's not in a hurry. Like, because it's just me. And if that client is on a really tight timeline, I am not the right contractor for them, because I don't have subs that are that responsive, because that are only working for me. I don't have subs that are going to show up the next day all the time. I mean, I think there are people that I like. There are people that I find are responsive. But the projects I end up contracting I would say in general, take longer than if you hired like a bigger operation.
So other than just, proximity to like where you live, what are some other criteria? What makes you take that jump from, architect to builder?
I think for me, it has to be something where I feel like I'm personally going to be able to add value as an architect to the build. So it has to be already a design that I think is maybe already a little bit atypical, that's going to make some contractors like afraid to get involved. Mm-hmm. Or make the kind of project where the contractors would be like, that's going to be expensive. Like that kind of response from another builder is the one where I'm like, okay, maybe that's the one that's worth, because I know that as the designer, I know the project better than anyone. Yeah. So I can explain like, oh, I know this might look crazy, but that you can kind of explain how something is more typical. Yeah. And you can work with them to make it more typical. Like if it is something that is more complicated to build, like a good subcontractor is going to work with you to simplify it, to make it more practical, which is important. Yeah. Like I don't believe in designing or building something crazy because it's crazy. Like there has to be a really good reason for why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, speaking of crazy and problem solving, this kind of gets me into your recent. Well, I say recent because this was actually built how many years ago?
We finished it in 2021. Okay. Like literally, they moved in I think one day before that freeze. That 2020 February freeze. Yes, I was afraid that the water heater was gonna explode and we were gonna have to deal with but no, it turned out to be fine.
So for everybody listening, this year's home tour, the AIA home tour, Nicole had a house on the tour called the Perch, and I will be posting pictures and links online, for everybody to look at and follow along. But let's really get into this, because talk about, trying to convince a contractor like, hey, hear me out. I'm going to build a house on top of another house, and they're not going to be touching. Let's figure this out. What was the problem that you were trying to solve here, and why did you take this approach?
Okay, so the problem that was stated by the client was, this was really the only solution when you take all the problems that they gave me. They said, the owner the husband is a landscape designer, landscape architect. So he's like, we love our yard. And you can't even tell from these photographs because this was after the freeze. They lost all of their landscaping in that freeze.
Oh, no.
So like 90% of it. So if you can imagine, this site was completely covered with greenery. I mean, when the Perch was built, I could send you a picture for if you're going to post this on your podcast. Mm-hmm. It was completed, and there's a Google Street View of the project where you can only see the tiny little tip of the top of the Perch because all of the plants, the trees, the greenery is completely covering the Perch. So what happened was we built it all behind this, basically this green screen in a way, right? And then the freeze happened, and it was almost like a curtain dropped, and the whole neighborhood could see this structure. Yeah. But you couldn't see it during construction. And so the owners basically said, we love our landscape. We don't really want you to touch it. Mm-hmm. They said, we love our bungalow house. We don't want to move out. We really don't want you to touch that either. We also love our backyard so much. We would love to have this little studio space, this extra space. We might use it for guests, for other things. We don't want it with a bunch of views to our backyard. We want some privacy in our backyard still. We see this as maybe guests will be there sometimes, maybe clients. Could it not face the backyard? And then I just went and they wanted it to be about this size, right? They wanted it to function maybe as a guest house, maybe as a workspace, maybe, they wanted it to be flexible to kind of take on any function they would need that didn't fit in the bungalow below.
Yeah. And it's 660 square feet, right? So that's a good size bonus space.
Yeah, it's essentially, and the spaces are so small. The living room, the kitchen, those bedrooms, they're all less than 10 feet wide. And they're pretty compact, and they feel bigger because of the height. Mm-hmm. But essentially, there wasn't any other place I could think on the site to fit it except above the bungalow. Uh-huh. So I thought, if we're not going to touch the bungalow and they're still going to live there, let's just raise it above the bungalow. Let's just hug that City of Austin setback tent. I think we hugged it a little bit too close. Next time I keep it in a few more inches.
That's such a good shot right there.
Yeah.
But that was essentially that was the plan. And I think, I built a physical model of it. I can send you a picture of that too. I share that a lot.
Okay.
I shared this. I presented in schematic design, our very first meeting. I presented a physical model of it. Wow. And I have a picture of the client. I have several pictures of the client at that meeting, looking at the model and all around it. And I think they just got it. It's they're like, you solved this problem that we didn't think was solvable.
Yeah, that's kind of an impossible scenario. It's like, hey, can you build us another, basically a second floor, but don't touch the house and don't touch the backyard. So that's really super creative. Because that was my first thought, was why not just add a second floor, But that makes sense, the way you describe it.
And I have to give a lot of credit to the structural engineer. Even though this was a concept, I thought there were going to be more columns.
Mm-hmm. You had 4 columns. That's it. That's incredible.
If you look at my model, you'll see 6 or 8, holding it up.
Yeah.
And I did not think it would work with 4. That was their engineering and them being creative. And I also thought those columns, I didn't know how they were going to impact the bungalow below. It was the structural engineer's idea to run the columns into existing walls.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Through existing walls, which of course makes a lot of sense. Because running them through existing walls allowed them to use those walls as support walls for the structure. And then what you don't see here is we dug
that was my next question. I was going to ask about that.
Huge 5 by 5 by 3 foot deep footings under each one of those columns.
Yeah.
So I have some pretty incredible pictures of people digging holes underneath the house where their head is completely covered. They're completely below grade.
So we love to brag about amazing trades.
Yeah.
Who was the structural engineer?
So
if you don't mind telling.
No, the structural engineer deserves so much credit. They're amazing. And they also did, if you go to the AIA website and you look at, like we did a webinar for the home store, the structural engineer and I are talking about the Perch in that webinar. So if anyone's interested in kind of learning more about it. But it's Structures PE.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Ryan Stoltz was the head engineer. He's actually engineered all of my projects.
Yeah, they're good.
Doing my own thing for 20 years now, and he's engineered like 80-90% of my projects.
And then they did the design. Who executed all the steel work? Because that's another feat.
Exactly. And of course, we're so lucky in Austin. Drop House.
Of course it's Drop House.
Of course. Yes. They make it so easy.
They did the hand railing too, didn't they, on the front there on the steps?
Actually, they didn't. They didn't. So they did all the structural steel. And then it was quite a long time later that we did like the staircase and there's like smaller steel elements inside. And I had talked to them about it, but they might have ended up being the people. It ended up being a smaller outfit, like kind of a one-man show. His name is Tim Schmidt, and he ended up contacting me while it was under construction and was like, I really love what you're doing, you know, if you need any help. And it just turned out he was like, I had known him prior, who's moving back to Austin. And I said, well, come to think of it, we're like at the point where we need to do this staircase. And we were making some design decisions about the staircase in the field. Like as we were building other elements, I was showing the client, you know, options for the staircase. And so we had kind of decided what they would be right around the same time Tim called. And I said, okay, bid this. And he was also great. It was great to have him on site. It's hard to believe one person built the treads, the risers, the railing.
Yeah. A lot of detail work.
Yeah, but it turned out, I mean, Drop House would have done an amazing job too. And I can give, you know, Drop House deserves some credit for also some of their ingenuity. So the structural steel, just the frame of it and the columns, again, the client didn't want to use the yard for staging area. So I was worried about the structural steel. And Drop House had the idea to build all of the structural steel off-site. Maybe they probably do this pretty often. Build it all off-site. They separated it, and they came up with the idea to separate it into 3 pieces that fit on a flatbed truck. And then we picked one day where we rented the truck, we closed down the street, we rented the crane, and they bolted and welded the whole thing into place. Started at sunup, ended at sundown.
Wow.
Yeah. One day.
Those guys are amazing. They do some really phenomenal work.
Yeah.
So, where's the air conditioner?
So because the vaulted space above is vaulted ceiling, right? That's where you would normally see it. So what's different about the Perch is that space below, right? So the AC unit runs front to back in that angled space below on the second floor.
Below the floor here?
So it's really to the right of that, right? Because it's right. So if you scroll up to that front cantilevered room, so that on that upper level is a flat floor, right? The floor is flat. The that space below that runs front to back holds the HVAC system right there.
That one, and I guess probably this one too. Then
no, actually.
Further to the right.
So it's just there front to back.
Yeah,
and and actually if you look at some of the interior shots, all of the registers on the second floor are in the floor, and all the registers on the first floor here. Okay, so if you stop at this, so do you see that row exactly? That row of circles in that wall on the other side of that wall is the HVAC unit. And actually from this view right here, on the front porch, you can see the door to the HVAC unit.
No kidding. I didn't even
right
see
there
that when I was there.
On the porch. Do you see the hinges there?
Yeah.
So if you open that door, the unit is sitting right there.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and then the ductwork runs front to back, right behind there, and the vents are in the toe kick of the cabinetry in the kitchen, and they're right there on that wall in the living room.
That's amazing. Where's the condenser, the exterior unit?
So you can't see it from any of these pictures. So if you go back to that stair view again from the front, let's see if you can see it from here. Okay, so do you see that?
I see it there.
Well, exactly. So do you see? So you see the 4 columns that are holding up the perch, right?
Yeah.
Do you see the column in the back, aligned right directly behind that column? Are 3 pipes sleeved with metal, and there's 3 pipes that carry water, sewer, gas, electric.
That was my next question. Okay, so
all in a line there. So I was trying to, and what's great about that is they feed directly down into the existing what used to be the water heater closet of the old bungalow. That's now their mechanical closet.
So no mechanicals run through the columns themselves.
No, those are all structural. Just structural. But there's 3 sleeved pipes behind there that carry
impressive.
Yeah,
they're
all
hidden
of that.
well.
Super hidden.
Thanks. Yeah, that was fun. It was in the perfect spot, right? Because it just I lucked out on that one, right? Because the mechanical closet was right below, right in the best place to hide them.
Who did the mechanicals or the design?
It's an HVAC guy that mostly does residential. I think his name is Thomas Ehrlich.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he said it. He was like, "Oh yeah, this is very straightforward."
It looks it.
Yeah, that's super neat. And so, talk a little bit, I guess, if you can, about kind of the materiality and some of the choices that you made as far as using this corrugated. Is that Corten?
We bought it as raw steel,
Okay.
and then we let it weather in place,
Right,
which
okay.
is more affordable.
Right.
And way easier to punch out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually a pretty affordable material, and we bought it from Western States Metal Roofing. Maybe you guys know about them out of Arizona. They're probably the most affordable place that I know of to buy a material like that. And we were able to order it in complete panels, front to back, without seams.
Oh wow.
So that also came on a flatbed truck.
That's some long runs.
Yeah, some very long runs.
It's like all of this down here.
That is all continuous. One continuous.
Wow.
Front to back. I will admit I'll call it a construction error, mistake, whatever the kinds of things that happen. They started wrapping closer to the bottom, and by the kind of the side that you see right here. Basically the whole bottom is where they started. And then they wrapped around to the east side, and by the time they got to the ridge, they realized the framing wasn't quite square enough to fold over the ridge and to still be straight. So on the roof, with this little pop out that you can see on the side here for some storage, we ended up having to run that side as seams to the ridge to mitigate the fact the framing wasn't quite square enough.
Yeah.
But it happens, and it's just a little bit off. So, but overall, almost no seams. Almost no seams.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges as far as the construction side? Kind of what was the hardest part? I mean,
Did the city give you any trouble with it?
Yeah.
Is it a unique design?
So what ended up happening with the city that was kind of funny was, and it kind of goes back to what you were asking about before. When we submitted the drawings, it didn't occur to them that there was a gap there, even though it was very clearly labeled and everything. They read the drawings, I don't know how, as if it was an addition. And so the historic reviewers took issue with the fact that we were changing the bungalow that much. They thought we weren't respecting the bungalow, and so we were wondering why it was taking a long time in permitting. And we finally got a notice in the mail from Historic saying they thought there should be a public hearing to like get public input to decide if we were if we were respecting the bungalow as enough with this addition. And that I had to, so when I got the letter, I called them and I was like, I had to explain, like, the owners love the bungalow so much, they didn't even want to touch it. Like, we're trying not to even touch it. And they didn't, and then once they realized that what we were actually doing and that there was a gap, they were actually happy, and they just passed it really quickly. We didn't have to have a public hearing.
Oh, super.
Yeah. But the engineer pointed out that right when we submitted these drawings, it was at a time where the city had just decided to start reviewing some like residential projects as if they were commercial projects, like to review the structural more thoroughly. And so Ryan Stoltz said that the city flagged this and that this became the very first project that was residential that the city reviewed more closely. Uh-huh. And he had to submit a lot more, like many more pages of calculations as if it was a commercial project. Uh-huh. But he said that it was used as like a case study for, I guess there's quite a bit of residential projects that are pretty like interesting and like maybe structurally more complicated than you might think a typical house is. Mm-hmm. So there are certain projects in residential now that get flagged for more structural review. So this one was flagged for that.
It probably should be for some of the structures that are getting designed and put out there from a safety standpoint. Somebody should check that. So,
right. Yeah.
Probably good practice.
So I think it was a lot more hours on his part that they weren't initially anticipating, but I think he was kind of proud to be the example.
That's cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's super neat. And like I said, just I was probably most excited to come see this one because I just thought this was so creative and I mean
unique,
literally outside of the box thinking, and trying to float one structure over another, and I just thought it was super cool. So,
but to the core of your design comments, that it isn't some crazy, engineered truss that goes out. It's standard building materials, relatively standard engineering, all put in a unique package.
That's what Ryan says. He said it really wasn't structurally. It's not that complicated.
Sure.
Even though it looks like it could be.
I don't know if you got this comment a lot too, but that desk space that kind of, and I'm sad there's no pictures of it right here, but there's a kind of in between one of the bedrooms and the bathrooms, there's like this little relief where you put in a desk and you're looking into kind of the downstairs area, and there's a window dividing, so you get perfectly, you can look out and see outside and inside at the same time. And I thought that was really cool. Yeah,
that's one of my favorite spots in the space is that little office nook, because I think for me, I design a lot of small spaces, and what I find is if you can design an even smaller little nook space inside a small space, the whole space will feel bigger. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of see that nook that way.
Okay.
It's like you're in there and you're in this like, it's a 3 foot wide space. As soon as you walk out of that space, I think the whole rest of the Perch feels a lot bigger than it normally would.
I agree.
And then, just like you said, I think another thing that I love about that little node is that you can be sitting in like this 3 foot wide space with a desk, but you're right, you can see people coming up the stair, and you're getting that light that's coming from outside, like onto the porch, and you can look down into the living room space. There's like a little bit of an angle to look down into living room, dining room, kitchen area. So you feel like you're kind of a part of the bigger space when you're in this smaller space. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I like about that is I think that upper level, if that was like let's say we just made the bathroom bigger,
sure,
and that didn't exist, I think it would make the whole second floor feel smaller, because there's something about like having 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. There's something about having that little nook space that then like looks down to other spaces and kind of frees up your overall sense of the volume of that second floor.
Yeah, it definitely kind of steals or borrows some of that volume from the lower level, and yeah, it does make it feel more open. I think you're spot on. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, all of a sudden that second like tiny little corridor with 2 pretty small rooms feels like spatially it's part of the bigger whole, just from that little tiny 3 foot wide.
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome.
Thanks.
Did you have anything else on this? Because
not on this. I could. We could talk about this one the whole time, but there are actually a lot of other things to talk about.
Yeah.
You
Let's
have
talk about
an
something
impressive
else.
portfolio.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, for
especially
sure.
coming from you.
Yeah, and I was kind of torn between talking about the Hive.
The
The
Hive.
Hive.
And, which I think is super cool and like very kind of whimsical design. But this one really kind of grabbed my attention because of
The Lincoln Chapel.
the Lincoln Chapel. Really, because this is all monolithic concrete, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Again, thanks to Structures. Structures
Exactly.
PE.
So that's really, and I follow you on Instagram, so I was able to kind of see some more construction photos of this. But that's really what grabbed me and pulled me towards this structure in particular, was just the construction method. If you could kind of shine a light on it and talk more about it, because you had to form both inside and outside and pour it all in one. So
Right.
Yeah, what was kind of the thought behind that? Like, and maybe describe a little bit like what are we looking at? What is this? And
Okay, sure. Well, I will start off the bat and say, like, I did not GC this project. This project is in Georgetown. It's way out of my zone, and I would have never tried to GC this project based on where I was in my career at the time. So this was GC'd by a guy named Eric Untersea, and he's kind of like, again, like a one-man show, small outfit. He was probably partially insane for agreeing to do this. It is, this was built in large part based on his like blood, sweat, and tears and ingenuity and figuring out how to make this happen. We definitely got a couple of bids from bigger concrete outfits that we might all be familiar with that were way out of budget for this client. And Eric said, I think I'll give it a try. And, there were many, like, trials and tribulations and failures that occurred. This was all supposed to be exposed concrete. And he kind of meticulously had figured out how to put some, like, I had, like, worked out the seams in the concrete.
Wow.
In that, and all the formwork was perfect with the seams that I had laid out. But the concrete pour didn't go as smoothly as anyone would have wanted it to. And so it was poured in 3 pours instead of 1. So as soon as they took the formwork off, you could see those lines. You could see, if you go to the chapel, you can see a big dent, like a big kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, like a pucker that's inside from the formwork starting to fail with the first pour.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was a very scary. We were all out there. There was the owner invited a bunch of friends to the concrete pour. So there were like 20, 30 people out there, I think, drinking wine. And it was very clear that the pour wasn't going well. And they had to stop it early. So what ended up happening at the end was, this was on a pretty tight budget, believe it or not.
Really?
So at the end, the client, I think, traded some services at the site to skim coat the whole thing in stucco at the very end.
Okay.
So while on some level that was sad, it it looks a lot better skim coated in this white. We probably should have realized that's what we were going to do and not like meticulously thought about all of these seams and built it that way.
The white works.
The white works.
Chapel. It
screams
fits the space.
Yeah, chapel for sure.
And I've since, seen all kinds of images of, like, one of my favorite buildings is Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim in New York. And I have books that show the construction process of that, and they also had some pretty rough looking formwork and skim coated the whole thing.
Yeah.
They also painted theirs. This one isn't painted.
Oh, this is an integral.
Yeah, it's an integral stucco
nice.
color. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that integral. Yeah, that's kind of is that you there?
Yeah, that's me.
Nice.
Yeah.
And awesome doors. What was kind of the end use of this building?
Yeah.
Is it just kind of a venue where people can go and if they need weddings?
Yeah, so the property already hosted outdoor weddings, like large outdoor weddings. There's another on the other end of this pretty large site. Are a couple of locations for outdoor weddings, and then they have a house kind of building where they often do like receptions. And the owners were getting requests for small ceremonies, and they didn't really have any place set up on site. And the owners were a little bit religious too, so they were like, we kind of want like a small covered space that could work in any weather, but for like 30 guests, or it was kind of what they were imagining. And they wanted it to feel non-denominational, but they also wanted it to feel religious in some way, for like on some level. And they had a really tight budget. So my thought was, they also had shown me a bunch of examples of churches, like small chapels that they liked. And one of them was a solid concrete structure and then they said, oh yeah, they liked the idea of it being a concrete structure. And I thought that would be amazing, right? That would just be incredible. So I thought, I knew that would be more expensive, but it would also be really good in terms of what they were wanting, for it to be like low maintenance, it could be less expensive in a lot of ways if it was concrete as well, because we could essentially make it an indoor-outdoor space.
Yeah.
We didn't have to climate control it. It could take a lot of other costs out of the picture. And so what I thought of when I was designing was, like, how small could I possibly make this structure so that it's not a lot of actual concrete area, but that it still feels good for 30 people. And then I wanted to be a structure is so amazing that even people with like 200 or 300 or 400 guests want to stay there. So I had the idea to shape it. I thought of this project that I had seen, a Louis Sarmaki Lewis project. It was a very small restaurant in New York that sold hot dogs. They had like 20-foot wide space, and it was something like 8 or 10 feet tall. And I had seen this lecture of their work, and they said to make like Dash Dogs feel bigger, they made it smaller by creating this like forced perspective inside the space. And by creating this forced perspective on raising the floor and slanting the walls, when you walked into this space, it felt bigger, it felt longer, it felt deeper, because they're taking advantage of like something, an illusion that we all learn about from in architecture school. And so I thought that could be a really cool idea for the chapel, because in a wedding, it's already focused on 2 people, right? You're already wanting to focus attention only on a couple. And so if we angle the walls and kind of create that forced perspective, and then we make the back just doors that can fully open, it kind of is like a megaphone too. So it's kind of like you can have a much bigger audience outside that can see that smaller, just the couple inside. And then I thought I wanted the space under the couple to feel more special. So I created that as like a double height space, and that you can't see that if you're in the audience. But if you're the couple, there's a double height space above you.
Right,
And
because it keeps going up.
Yeah.
Here, you just can't see.
it works. It's like, I was trying to evoke those ideas of like the steeple, right? That we all where we are all familiar with it in a church that's usually at the front of the church. I thought we can kind of create a steeple. It creates this like very, very narrow, tiny double height space just above the couple. And then also, like, let's point it towards this tree on the site, so it kind of also feels like you're connecting to nature. And let's make the front and the back fully operable doors. So you can, like, catch breezes, you can, like, you don't need electricity, you don't need to pay for lighting. And it turns out, they have a pretty active Instagram, and they have weddings there all the time with, like, 200 and 300 people. Wow. Sometimes they're outside, and then like near the tree, like they'll set up all the chairs on that side, and the couple is in front of that steeple form. And sometimes the chairs go the other way, and the chairs go all the way out into that like courtyard space. Yeah. And the couple is at the end, and so they use the site in all different kinds of ways. And I think, the shape of the building is kind of meant to kind of echo or reference like house, like a very like a human scale, right? House and church kind of at the same time.
Well, I think your description of it is absolutely spot on. A non-denominational religious building, and that's exactly what it invokes. It's got a respect and definitely a religious feel to it, but it doesn't say what that is.
Right.
And that allows it to be any special space. I think it's amazing.
It's super simple. It's just kind of this folded origami type form, but the way you describe the functionality of it and how the design actually serves a purpose, towards that functionality. Yeah, I didn't even notice until you're describing it how it is kind of megaphone shaped. How the walls taper in, towards one side, and that's where the couple stands. And and you're right. I mean, looking at this image, you do kind of have that forced perspective. Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
It feels bigger.
It looks so simple, but it's not. It's not quite as simple as it looks.
The floor slopes like with the landscape, so that you don't have this like huge step at the end, right? It just kind of stays with the landscape, and then. But the walls that are vertical they're falling even faster, right? So you still get that force, and they're obviously tapering towards the couple, right? So you do have that sense that the space is much bigger than it actually is. And this image that we're looking at right here has the chairs, but and this is what they had at first, but then they built the benches that I had designed, and so I have another set of photographs after they did the benches. Yeah. And the benches are also, they have like very slight angles, but they
looks a lot cleaner. This is more busy.
And you can they use these chairs for the larger ceremonies, right?
Sure.
And then if it's a smaller one, they just use the benches. And the benches have these angles where there's a bunch of configurations. They can fit together along the side walls. You can fit them together and create like larger benches and platforms. The way that they work geometrically, there's a lot of flexibility in them as well.
Yeah.
So that's that's the part that's fun for me, is like when you start getting into the geometries of it, then I don't know if like other ideas open up and you can do, things that like you said, you can like play with people's perception of space. And
super cool.
Yeah.
No, and it definitely, like, I was gravitated immediately towards this project. It's really unique. Yeah. It looks like just about all the ones that you do are just completely unique. I kind of do want to talk about the Hive really quick if we can.
Sure.
Hive, and then I have one more too.
Sure.
Yeah. So question for you though, kind of a segue, but
okay.
What do you think is the recipe for a successful project?
A successful project.
Yeah.
Well, I think, for me, the best projects have really great clients. And a client does not mean like a great client doesn't mean they have to have a lot of money. It doesn't mean that it has to be a really interesting program, right? I mean, like an ADU, a guest house, like these are basic programs that a lot of families need, right? Like a really great client is one that I feel like there's a lot of trust, where they understand that not everything is going to be solved the first time around. Like they know that we're like going to go on a journey together. And they know that like they're going to participate in it, but they also trust you. They trust that you have their best interests in mind, and they trust that I know what they want. And it's just like there's not a lot of I don't worry that they're going to be upset if I make a mistake, because I make mistakes. And then a lot of times those mistakes are things that we get to solve together, right? And then they make mistakes, like on the Hive. You're talking. This client insisted on having a bathtub, and then like once they saw the bathtub installed, they didn't like it. After I told them I didn't think they should have a bathtub, right? So like the client makes mistakes, and it's like it's kind of. Subcontractors make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. It's like, it's kind of just agreeing that we're all have good intentions and we care about the project, and we're all going to work together to try to make it as great as it can be.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that's what it takes to have a good project, is to have a good client.
Good client and a good team. Like you
Yeah,
said.
exactly. A
It's
good
the
team.
And then communication, which you already mentioned.
Right.
The communication, the honest team, and the collaboration. If you've got that, that's probably 90% of the whole thing.
You can make you almost can't make a bad project when you have that working for you. When people are not like finger pointing and creating conflict. When everybody is just working to knows that everybody has the intention to make the project great, and you're all working towards that goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love the siding.
Thanks.
What is that material?
So that is cedar. It's a cedar shake, and believe it or not, we got that material for free. Like, can you believe that?
Wow.
So that's crazy, right? So
Beautiful.
The owner so this is an ADU that's behind a bungalow, and the owner was living in the bungalow, but she and her husband are filmmakers, or they worked in TV and film, so they were away from their house a lot. So they were like, we don't want to leave it empty all the time, but we're off like 3 months out of the year, and we need a place to stay. And they really love their property, also in East Austin. So they decided they could rent out the main house if they could build a small like ADU for themselves in the back that they could live in, because they didn't need the whole house 3 months out of the year, that they could live in 3 months out of the year, and then they could also rent it out when they weren't there.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the program. And their main bungalow, when I started the design process, they were getting the bungalow ready to rent, and they were replacing the roof, and they took off a corrugated metal roof, and they found shingles underneath the roof.
So that's the reclaimed roof of the bungalow that's on the property.
Well, not exactly. So they sent me all these photos of the shingles they had pulled off, and like piles of them, right? And they were like, can you reuse this material? And so my plan was to use it for the siding, but there wasn't enough. There wasn't quite enough, and they were also a little bit flimsy. So I started calling around to all the roofers I knew that I had worked with prior, and it turned out, you guys might know him, there's a roofer who also does contracting. His name is Mark Rayberg. Our Builders is his company. Anyway, he said he had done a job in Austin, 20 years prior, and he took all these cedar shakes off of a roof, and he said they'd been sitting in his storage for 20 years.
Wow.
And he said at this point he thought they might be kindling in there. Like, he was afraid they might catch on fire or something, because so he said, just take them, just get them out of here. And
Wow.
And they were like wider, sturdier. It was like basically like a better version of
Yeah,
the shakes
yeah.
that we took off of the main of the bungalow. But I don't even know if I would have thought to look for that material if the owner hadn't said like, "Hey, look at this material that we have."
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I think this is like what I like about designing and contracting is like these stories, like you can kind of take advantage of things like that. So yeah, ended up working out perfect.
Yeah, that's super, super cool. And kind of describe the structure and the shape, if you will, because I'm guessing, just based on our conversation, there's a reason behind the way this is shaped.
Yeah. Yes, there is. So the Hive is the Hive is the first new construction project that I also contracted. So this was basically after I did this that I was like, oh, I really like this. I like this contracting thing. So in designing this is the one that we like bid out to a bunch of people initially, and then all the bids came back high, and then the project got tabled for like a year before the client came back and was like, okay, how can we do this? And then I was like, okay, why don't you let me try to bid it out? So her lot in East Austin with the original bungalow, it had an addition on the back with a huge wraparound porch, and there was a driveway that came all the way in. So the lot didn't have a lot of impervious cover left. It had 320 square feet of impervious cover left, to be exact, and that's only when I took out the sidewalk, like the front walk. All right, I had to take that out, and then and also ADUs have to have their own parking space, or maybe not anymore, but they did at the time. So we had to add that parking as well. So I was like factoring that in. And she also had, there was an angled utility easement that ran through the back of her property that created a sharp angle across the back. And so I knew, and that is that angle, that back angle that you see there. So, and she wanted...
This one here?
Yeah, so it's actually, you can see it better from an aerial view. So it's actually, you can't quite tell from here. It's the back edge. Yeah,
this back wall here.
No, it's you wouldn't be able to tell from that view. Okay. But it's the right side of that. The right side of that is creating an angle. Gotcha. And if you so this again, I think this view is maybe deceptive in a way, but like that right corner keeps going back at that angle of the angled utility of the easement, and you can't tell, but that Hive is growing in that direction that is hidden from this view.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, and you could maybe see it from another exterior view. Maybe the very first exterior shot was at the front.
Was the first.
No, there it is. One. So you can't tell, but you can't really tell from there either. But you can see from here that porch that's on their main house in the back on the left-hand side.
This here.
Yeah. And that porch was an addition that they had hired someone else, and the owner said, we really like reusing materials. And they had hired someone else to do that, and that porch addition and that addition in the main house had like kind of a Japanese feel to it. And that porch right there, that had doors laid sideways as the railing. I don't know if you can tell.
Or that right there?
Yeah, that's a door laid sideways.
Okay.
That was also a lot of inspiration for the Hive, is that we used a lot of reused materials, a lot of recycled materials for that reason. But so the angled utility easement and the impervious cover at 320 square foot, they wanted it to feel like a large one bedroom. They wanted laundry, they wanted an outdoor shower, they wanted bike storage, they wanted an office, they wanted a cook's kitchen. So I knew that if I was confined to 320 square feet, that I wasn't going to fit everything in that. And so I was going to have a second floor that was like leaned away from that footprint. So that's when I came up with the idea to like lean the walls. So there's 3 walls that are vertical, and then I thought I'll lean one wall out because I've got to have like a stair that's to code, and then like that's going to push out a little bit to fit a bathroom up there. I'll push out a little bit this way to fit a bedroom, and then the living room was so small. I was like, I gotta lean that wall in the back of the living room a little bit so that the living room feels bigger. Because like the footprint is so tiny, but if I lean that wall, it'll feel a lot bigger.
Yeah, you're right.
So for those listening, it's kind of like an upside down pyramid.
Right.
Right. All the walls are tapering out from a small footprint.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I've never thought of it that way.
But that's so, again, typical, this your style. There's this massive problem, and you're cheating the system here. You're like, how do we solve this? We got a tiny footprint, but, we just push the walls out, and we make the second floor bigger, and we're leaning everything out. Like, there's a reason, why it's shaped the way it is. It's not just to give it this whimsical look. It's like, this is solving the problem.
It's architecture, because
Yes.
solving the problem, people could have just done a flat wall up and then stepped out and gone up. And
Sure.
that would look boring.
Exactly.
This looks awesome.
It wouldn't have even felt as big, right?
It wouldn't.
No.
No, because it's like there's something about the leaning of the walls that really just expands your perception of space.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, like, something I thought about in retrospect that I talk about a little bit now is it reminds me of that, like, Vitruvian Man that you kind of learn about in school. Is it Da Vinci that did it? And so, or maybe I guess it's Vitruvius, and where like his arms and his legs like make a circle, right? And so what you kind of learn from that diagram is you need more space around the middle of your body, and you don't need as much space around your feet or around your head. And so I kind of I wasn't thinking about that when I designed that, but I think about it afterwards. Like this is a picture of the bedroom. Like, that bedroom feels bigger if you have more space kind of at your eye level, kind of at the middle of your body when you're sitting in that bed.
Sure.
And you don't need a lot of room at your feet or at the head for that room to feel that big. And that room to me feels like a pretty big space. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can see the floor. I mean, there's not a lot of floor area there. No. I think there's like less than 2 feet of floor area at the end of that bedroom.
Wow.
But that was like, so because they were on a tight budget, it was helpful because the area of floor material that we needed was pretty small.
Yeah.
And then we got to buy this like charred wood from Delta Millworks, which is super expensive, but we only needed like 200 square feet.
Right, yeah.
And it made the whole place like, we got to use some nicer materials because we didn't need as much square footage because we kept everything really tight. So like, here's the bathroom again in this space. Like, look at the floor area.
Yeah.
It's tiny. There's not even 2 feet of space in front of the sink.
Yeah, it's like a camper. It's like a little camper bathroom, but it gets bigger.
But where you're standing, where your eye level is, it feels big. And you've got bring in some natural light.
Yeah.
And it's like, it actually feels spacious when you're in there, even though it's tiny.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Thanks.
Yeah. I wish I could have seen this one in person.
They rent it out on Airbnb every once in a while. It's not that expensive.
Okay.
It's not too expensive. They let me stay there once, and it was fun. Yeah, but I learned a lot. It helped to have that client. So that client gave me a lot of freedom. They're filmmakers, so they understood. She actually likened the whole process to filmmaking. Because she was like, it reminds me of when I make a film. Like, I start with a script. I kind of think I know what's going to happen. But when you're filming, she's like, you have to, like, be aware of what else is going on around you and, like, draw from that. And so she understood that and, like, gave me that freedom.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason
That's great.
that this project even exists, is because she kind of let me take it where it needed to go.
Yeah, I'm glad she did. That's awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate her a lot for that.
Yeah.
I have one other thing I wanted to ask about.
Sure.
Pedestrian geometries.
Okay, sure.
Tell us about those.
Okay, so Pedestrian Geometries is a project that I did in collaboration with an artist, Aaron Curtis. And so it's for art in public places. Are you familiar with their program?
I'm not, but I looked at some of your pedestrian geometry pieces.
Okay.
That's kind of what I thought is, okay, this is a public art, but that's, just to brag about your portfolio a little bit, I mean, the residential, the commercial, the public space work you've got, that's broad. And they're unique and quite varied in the different things that they are.
Right.
And so they caught, there they are. That caught my attention. Where do they put those? Where do they?
So those are downtown on East, or sorry, not East. They're all along 3rd Street, downtown. So if you walk down or drive down 3rd Street, you'll see them. Like at every block or so, there'll be 1 or 2 or 3 of them.
Wow. Yeah, I'm going to have to go find them.
Yeah. So Erin is a visual artist, and her visual art looks a lot like this. So this is really, she took the lead on the kind of visual language of these. And then, she didn't know anything about building anything 3-dimensionally. So I had already had a relationship with Elgin Butler, so I had suggested, from the start, I had suggested the material, like Elgin Butler that has this really great material, these like glazed bricks, and they're local, and they have all these colors, and we can create these colors and patterns, and so she really liked that idea. And then, I talked to her about let's come up with certain basic cuts, right? Let's come up with just a few different kinds of cuts. And then I found the masons that made them, and I kind of oversaw that relationship with how can we let's prototype these and make these, and because we had a very strict budget with the city. But she took the lead on, and she should, because as a visual artist in that relationship, took the lead on this is the end design, pattern, color put together thing that I want them to look like. But it was a collaboration that I did with her, and it was fun. I really loved it. I mean, and again, it was this was around the same time as the Hive, so I got to again kind of explore those construction skills. And so that's it. So that's a plan. That last one is a plan of 3rd Street, and some of these have gotten moved around and hit, but so that's one that you might see, and then you can see that site plan of all of 3rd Street. Where they're dotted up and down that street.
Art for the sake of art.
Yeah.
They're really neat.
Art for public places.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think I want to end on one last question.
Okay.
Which is, what do you love most about what you do?
What do I love most about what I do? I mean, I love when clients or other people that get to experience the spaces, getting to see how much joy spaces that I design can bring to them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. As builders, it makes complete sense.
So, I'm always happiest when clients at the end of a project just tell me how much they love being in this space and what they love about it. I love when people tell me they wish they lived there, when someone visits a space, oh, I wish I lived here, that kind of stuff just makes me feel so. Or when people get to visit spaces, it just feels so good to know that something we build or design can have such a positive impact on someone's daily life, or and that's why I do what I do.
Awesome. Yeah, loved every part of that. Nicole, thank you for coming on. Cheers to you.
Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to know you, glad to have met you and get you on. So I really appreciate your time.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure.